The auctioneer's gavel struck wood with a sound that would haunt Thaddeus Armstrong for weeks, marking the moment he purchased another human being on a dusty platform in Castle Dome, Arizona Territory, in the blazing summer of 1878. He had not come to the settlement intending to buy anyone. The trip from his struggling ranch outside town was meant for supplies, and maybe decent breeding stock, not standing in a crowd of leering men while a young woman stood before them with her chin raised high, despite the humiliation burning in her cheeks. The sign hanging from her neck read simply, "Unfit for marriage will work." Thaddeus watched as bidders laughed and made crude remarks, and something in him snapped when he saw her hands trembling even as she kept her spine straight. $500, he called out, his voice cutting through the jeers. The crowd fell silent. It was an outrageous sum, more than twice what anyone else had offered. The auctioneer, a portly man with sweat staining his collar, recovered quickly. $500 going once, twice, sold to the gentleman in the brown hat. Thaddeus moved through the parting crowd and climbed the platform steps, his boots heavy on the weathered wood. Up close, he could see she was younger than he first thought, perhaps 22 or 23, with auburn hair pulled back severely and eyes the color of storm clouds. She stared at him with a mixture of defiance and barely concealed terror. "What is your name?" he asked quietly, aware of the crowd still watching. "Temperance Parker," she said, her voice steadier than her hands. "And I suppose you think that money gives you the right to whatever you want from me." "I think that money gives you a chance to not be standing on this platform anymore," Thaddeus replied. He was 31, weathered by sun and hard work, and he had no patience for games. "I need help at my ranch. You need somewhere to go. That is the extent of what I am offering." Doubt flickered across her face. Men do not spend that kind of money out of kindness. "No, they do not," he agreed. "I spend it because I am desperate. My ranch is failing. I lost 3 hands last month to a silver mine promising better wages. My cattle are scattered across land I cannot cover alone, and if I do not turn things around before winter, I will lose everything my father built. So if you can work, truly work, then that money was a bargain." The auctioneer cleared his throat impatiently, holding out papers. Thaddeus signed without reading them fully, hating himself a little more with each stroke of the pen. Whatever legal fiction gave him ownership of another person's labor turned his stomach, but leaving her to the mercy of the other bidders would have been worse. He led Temperance to his wagon, extending a hand to help her up. She ignored it, climbing aboard herself with a determined awkwardness that spoke of too many months in situations where accepting help came with strings. Thaddeus said nothing, just walked to the other side and hauled himself up, taking the reins. They rode in silence through the scattered buildings of Castle Dome, past the saloons and general store, toward the open desert beyond. The landscape was harsh and beautiful in equal measure, all red rock and stubborn vegetation clinging to life. Thaddeus's ranch lay 5 miles northwest, tucked against the foothills where a reliable spring provided water year-round. "Why were you on that platform?" he finally asked. Temperance was quiet so long he thought she would not answer. Then she said, "My father arranged a marriage for me back in Missouri. The man was wealthy, respectable. I was supposed to be grateful." Her voice carried bitter edges. 3 days before the wedding, I discovered he already had a wife in Chicago. When I refused to go through with it, my father disowned me, said I was ruining the family's one chance to settle his debts. So he sent you west. He sold me to a man who promised I would find a good situation. Instead, I found myself passed from one place to another, each worse than the last, until I ended up on that platform. She turned to look at him directly. The sign said unfit for marriage because I refuse to be property. I refuse to smile and submit and pretend I am grateful for scraps of human decency. Apparently, that makes me defective. Thaddeus felt a reluctant admiration rising. On my ranch, I do not need you to smile, I need you to work. Can you do that? I can, she said firmly. What kind of work? Everything, he admitted. I have 200 head of cattle scattered across 5,000 acres. The fence lines need constant repair. The barn roof is half rotted. The garden that was supposed to feed us through winter died when my last housekeeper left. I need someone who can cook, mend, help with the animals, and not collapse after the first hard day. I can do all of that, Temperance said. I grew up on a farm before my father decided to become respectable in town. I know animals and hard work. They crested a rise, and Thaddeus's ranch spread below them. The house was adobe, sturdy but showing signs of neglect. The barn needed paint and new shingles. Corrals stood empty in the afternoon heat. It looked like exactly what it was, a place where one man was losing a battle against too much land and too many responsibilities. It is not much, Thaddeus said. It is more than I had an hour ago, Temperance replied. He drove the wagon to the house and helped unload the supplies he had purchased in town. Inside, the house was clean but sparse. A main room with a fireplace and table, a small kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and not much else. Thaddeus showed Temperance to the smaller bedroom, which held only a narrow bed and a dresser with a cracked mirror. This is yours, he said. The door has a lock. Use it if it makes you feel safer. Temperance studied him with those storm-gray eyes. Why are you telling me this? Because I want to be clear about what this arrangement is. You work. I pay you in room and board and wages when I can afford them. Nothing else. I am not the kind of man who bought you expecting anything but labor. Men say a lot of things, she said quietly. I know. You will have to decide over time whether to believe me or not. He turned to leave, then paused. There is coffee in the kitchen if you want some. Supper is usually around sunset. I am not much of a cook, but I can manage beans and bacon. I will cook tonight, Temperance said. If you want me to earn my place, I might as well start now. That first evening set the pattern for the weeks that followed. Temperance moved through the house with purposeful efficiency, taking stock of what needed doing and tackling it with determination that impressed Thaddeus. She cooked meals that were simple but better than anything he had managed in months. She mended torn curtains, organized the chaotic kitchen, and swept away accumulated dust and neglect. More importantly, she proved capable with the ranch work. On her second morning, Thaddeus woke before dawn to find her already dressed and waiting by the barn. I thought we could check the north pasture, she said. You mentioned cattle scattered. We should know what we are working with. They rode out together as the sun painted the desert gold and crimson. Thaddeus watched as Temperance handled her horse with easy competence, sitting the saddle like someone born to it. They found a dozen head grazing near the spring and drove them back toward the corrals. By midday, they had accounted for 30 cattle and discovered a section of fence trampled flat, probably by wild horses passing through. We need to repair this before we lose more stock, Temperance said, examining the broken posts. They spent the afternoon digging new post holes and stringing wire, back-breaking work under the relentless sun. Temperance never complained, though Thaddeus saw her wince when barbed wire caught her palm, drawing blood. Let me see that, he said, reaching for her hand. She pulled back instinctively and he stopped, keeping his distance. There is a medical kit in the barn, he said instead. Make sure to clean it well. Infections can be dangerous out here. Over the following weeks, a cautious trust began to grow between them. Thaddeus learned that Temperance had a sharp mind for numbers and organization. She created a system for tracking the cattle, noting which animals needed veterinary attention and which were ready for sale. She replanted the garden with late-season vegetables and coaxed green shoots from the stubborn earth. She mended tack, reorganized the barn, and somehow found time to repair the worst sections of the house roof. "Where did you learn all this?" Thaddeus asked one evening over supper. "My mother," Temperance said, a softness entering her voice. "She died when I was 15, but before that she taught me everything about running a farm. My father never forgave her for dying. I think he blamed me too, somehow, as if I should have been able to prevent it. That is a heavy burden for a child to carry." "I survived it," she said simply. "I survive most things." Thaddeus wanted to tell her she should not have to merely survive, that she deserved better than a life measured by what could be endured. But he held his tongue, sensing she would not welcome pity. As summer faded toward autumn, they fell into a rhythm. They worked the ranch together from dawn until dusk, gradually bringing order to chaos. The cattle were rounded up, vaccinated and properly counted. Fences were repaired. The garden began producing enough that Temperance could preserve food for winter. The barn roof got new shingles, and the house received minor repairs that made it feel less like a temporary shelter and more like a home. Thaddeus found himself watching Temperance more than he should. The way she pushed hair from her face when concentrating, leaving dusty streaks on her cheek. The quiet satisfaction in her eyes when she accomplished something difficult. The rare smile that transformed her whole face when one of the barn cats presented her with a dead mouse like it was a prize. He was falling in love with her, and it terrified him. Not because love itself frightened him, but because of how they had come together. He had purchased her like livestock, and no matter how much he told himself he had been saving her, the fundamental wrongness of it remained. What if she felt obligated to him? What if any feelings she might develop were tainted by gratitude or fear or the simple lack of other options? So he kept his distance, remaining polite and professional, even as something in his chest ached every time she laughed or reached out to touch his arm while pointing out something on the horizon. October brought the first real challenge. Thaddeus rode to town for supplies and returned to find Temperance facing down 3 men in the ranch yard. He recognized them as hands from the Triple Cross Ranch, 10 miles east, a spread owned by Marcus Reeves, a man Thaddeus had never liked. He urged his horse forward, positioning himself between Temperance and the men. "Something I can help you with, gentlemen," the largest of the 3, a man named Decker with a scar across his jaw, grinned unpleasantly. "Just having a conversation with your woman here. Reeves is hiring, and we figured she might want to know about it. Better wages, better accommodations, more respectable situation than whatever arrangement you got going here." "Miss Parker is not interested," Thaddeus said coldly. "Now get off my land." "Miss Parker can speak for herself, can't you, sweetheart?" Decker said, trying to see around Thaddeus. "Unless Armstrong here keeps you locked up tight." "I said get off my land." Thaddeus's hand moved to the rifle on his saddle. The men exchanged glances, measuring their odds. Finally, Decker shrugged. "We will be going, but the offer stands. Reeves pays his debts and treats his people fair. Think about it." They rode off slowly, making it clear they were leaving on their own terms, not out of fear. Thaddeus waited until they were out of sight before dismounting. "Are you all right?" he asked Temperance. "I am fine," she said, but he could see anger tightening her features. "They showed up an hour ago, saying Reeves had heard about me and wanted to extend an offer. When I told them I was not interested, they started making implications about what kind of arrangement you and I must have. Apparently, it is impossible that I might actually want to be here." Reeves is testing boundaries, Thaddeus said grimly. He has been trying to buy this land for years. My father refused to sell, and I have refused since his death. This is his way of applying pressure. By trying to take your housekeeper. By trying to take the person keeping this ranch functional, Thaddeus corrected. He is not stupid. He can see the improvements. He knows I could not manage alone. Temperance crossed her arms. I am not going anywhere, but I do not like being used as a piece in someone else's game. Neither do I. Thaddeus started unloading supplies from the wagon. We need to be careful. Reeves is not above making trouble if he thinks it will benefit him. Over the next few weeks, small problems began plaguing the ranch. A section of fence was cut in the night, letting 30 head of cattle wander onto Reeves's land. When Thaddeus went to retrieve them, he was told they had been impounded for trespassing, and he would need to pay a fee. Tools went missing from the barn. The water trough was found sabotaged, forcing them to spend a day repairing it while the cattle went thirsty. This is deliberate, Temperance said after the fourth incident. He is trying to wear us down. I know. Thaddeus stood at the window, staring into the darkness beyond. But I cannot prove it, and the law in Castle Dome is more sympathetic to Reeves than to me. He contributes to the sheriff's election fund. Then we fight back, Temperance said. How? We are two people against his whole operation. We are two people who refuse to quit. She moved to stand beside him, close enough that he could smell the soap she used, something with lavender. You did not give up on this ranch when you lost your hands. You did not give up when your father died and left you with all this responsibility. Why would you give up now? Because now I have you to worry about, Thaddeus said before he could stop himself. Temperance turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. You do not need to worry about me. I can take care of myself. I know you can. That does not mean I stop worrying. They stood in charged silence, something unspoken shifting between them. Then Temperance stepped back, breaking the moment. We should take shifts watching the property, she said, her voice carefully neutral. If someone is sabotaging the ranch, maybe we can catch them at it. They started alternating night watches, taking turns sitting up with a rifle and hot coffee, listening to the desert sounds beyond the house. On the third night, Temperance woke Thaddeus just before midnight. Someone is at the barn, she whispered. They crept out together, moving quietly through the darkness. Sure enough, a figure was visible near the corral, doing something to the gate. Thaddeus raised his rifle and fired into the air. The intruder bolted, running for a horse waiting beyond the fence line. In the moonlight, Thaddeus caught a glimpse of the Triple Cross brand on the horse's flank before rider and mount disappeared into the night. Did you see his face? Temperance asked. No, but I saw his horse. That is proof enough for me. The next morning, Thaddeus rode to the Triple Cross. He found Marcus Reeves on his porch, a heavy-set man in his 50s with calculating eyes and a politician's smile. Armstrong, what brings you out this way? You can call off your men, Thaddeus said flatly. I am not selling. I have no idea what you are talking about. Yes, you do. The sabotage stops now, or I will make sure everyone in the territory knows what kind of man you are. Reeves's smile faded. You cannot prove anything, and making accusations against me would be very unwise. I have friends, Armstrong, influential friends. You are just a struggling rancher with a purchased woman running your household. People talk about that, you know, about what kind of man buys a woman and keeps her isolated on his ranch. Makes folks wonder. Thaddeus felt his jaw tighten. My arrangement with Miss Parker is legitimate and legal. Legal, sure, but is it proper? That is what people ask. A young woman, unattached, living alone with a single man, no chaperone, no oversight. The rumors practically write themselves. Reeves leaned back in his chair. Of course, if you sold me the ranch, you could afford to set her up somewhere respectable. Maybe even make an honest woman of her if you are so inclined. But struggling to keep that land, working her like a ranch hand, that just looks bad. This conversation is over. Thaddeus turned his horse. Think about my offer, Armstrong. $20,000 for your land and water rights. Enough to start over somewhere easier, somewhere you could actually provide for that woman properly. Thaddeus rode away without answering, fury making his hands shake on the reins. He knew Reeves was trying to manipulate him, but the words burrowed under his skin nonetheless. Was he being unfair to Temperance? She worked herself exhausted most days, her hands rough from labor, her face perpetually sun-darkened. She deserved better than a failing ranch and a man too proud or too stubborn to admit when he was beaten. When he returned home, Temperance was working in the garden, harvesting the last of the autumn vegetables. She looked up as he approached, reading his expression instantly. What happened? He told her everything, including Reeves's implications and his offer. Temperance listened in silence, her face unreadable. So he is using gossip as a weapon now, she said when he finished. He is using the truth as a weapon, Thaddeus corrected bitterly. People are talking about us. About the propriety of our arrangement, and they are right to question it. Are they? Temperance stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. Should I have stayed on that platform? Should I have gone with whoever else might have bought me, hoping they would be kinder than you have been? Or maybe I should have refused everyone and starved in the street. Would that have been more proper? That is not what I mean. Then what do you mean, Thaddeus? She so rarely used his first name that hearing it now caught him off guard. Do you regret bringing me here? Am I an embarrassment to you? You could never be an embarrassment. You are the most capable, determined person I have ever met. You saved this ranch. Then what is the problem? The problem is that I want more than I have any right to ask for, he said, the words escaping before he could cage them. The problem is that I wake up every morning grateful you are here, and I go to sleep every night wishing I had met you differently, in a way that did not involve money changing hands and papers being signed. The problem is that I am falling in love with you, and I have no right to those feelings because of how we came together. Temperance stared at him, her eyes wide. You think you are the only one feeling that way? What? I have been falling in love with you for months, you impossible man. Every time you step back to give me space. Every time you ask instead of demand. Every time you work beside me instead of above me. I look at you and see someone decent in a world that has not shown me much decency. And yes, it terrifies me because I know how we started. But that does not change what I feel. Thaddeus felt like the desert ground had shifted beneath his feet. You love me. I do, she said simply. I love your stubbornness and your terrible cooking and the way you talk to the horses like they might answer back. I love that you saw me on that platform and decided I was worth saving, even though you could barely afford to save yourself. I love you, and I am tired of pretending I do not. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, and then she was in his arms, and he was kissing her with months of suppressed longing. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms wrapping around his neck, fingers tangling in his hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thaddeus rested his forehead against hers. We should get married, he said. If you will have me, not because of what anyone thinks, but because I love you and I want to spend my life with you. Yes, Temperance said, smiling that rare, brilliant smile. Yes, I will marry you. They were married in Castle Dome 3 weeks later, with the Justice of the Peace and his wife serving as witnesses. Temperance wore a simple blue dress, the nicest thing she owned, and carried wildflowers Thaddeus had picked that morning. It was nothing like the elaborate wedding her father had tried to arrange, and it was perfect. Their wedding night was tender and awkward and wonderful, all nervousness and laughter and genuine affection. Afterward, lying in bed with Temperance's head on his chest, Thaddeus felt a contentment he had not known existed. "What happens now?" Temperance asked sleepily. "Now we keep working. We build something good here together. And Reeves, let him talk. We know the truth of what we are to each other. That is enough." But Reeves was not content to simply talk. 2 weeks after the wedding, a lawyer appeared at their door with papers claiming a boundary dispute. According to documents Reeves had suddenly produced, the spring that watered Thaddeus's ranch actually fell on Triple Cross land, and he wanted compensation for years of unauthorized use. "This is ridiculous," Temperance said, reading the claim. "Your father homesteaded this land 40 years ago. The spring has always been part of the property." "I know, but fighting this in court will cost money we do not have." Thaddeus paced the kitchen, anger and frustration warring in his chest. "Reeves is trying to bleed us dry with legal fees." "Then we need to find proof of ownership that is irrefutable." Temperance went to the roll-top desk where Thaddeus kept important papers. "Your father must have had surveys done, original land claims, something that establishes the spring as part of the homestead." They spent 3 days sorting through decades of accumulated paperwork, until Temperance finally found a surveyor's map from 1840, clearly showing the spring within the Armstrong property boundaries. The surveyor had been a government official, and his findings were a matter of federal record. "This is it," she said triumphantly. "This proves the spring has always been ours." They took the documents to Castle Dome, where the lawyer reviewed them and grudgingly admitted they superseded any claims Reeves might make. The boundary dispute was dropped, but Thaddeus knew it would not be the last attempt. "He is going to keep coming after us," he told Temperance on the ride home. "Let him. We will keep fighting back." She reached across the wagon seat to take his hand. "We are stronger together than he is alone. He will figure that out eventually." The harassment continued through the winter, but each attempt failed. When Reeves tried to claim some of their cattle had been stolen from him, Thaddeus produced meticulously kept breeding records showing the animal's lineage. When he tried to have Temperance arrested for some trumped-up charge related to her time on the auction platform, the justice of the peace refused to issue a warrant, noting she was now a respectably married woman and entitled to put her past behind her. Slowly, Reeves seemed to realize he was fighting a losing battle. The sabotage stopped. The legal challenges faded. By spring, an uneasy peace had settled over the territory. The ranch continued to improve. With 2 of them working in concert, they brought in the best calf crop in years. Temperance's garden flourished, producing enough vegetables to sell in town along with beef. They hired 2 reliable hands, young men grateful for steady work, and began expanding the herd. On a warm evening in May, Temperance told Thaddeus she was pregnant. He pulled her close, overwhelmed with joy and fear in equal measure. "Are you happy?" "Terrified and happy," she admitted. "I am going to be responsible for a whole person. What if I am terrible at it? You will be wonderful," he said with complete certainty. "This child will be lucky to have you as a mother. As lucky as I was to find you, luckier. This child will be born free into a family that wants them. They will never know what it is like to be used as a commodity or treated as less than human. We will make sure of that." Their son was born in January of 1880, during a rare snowstorm that turned the desert white. Thaddeus delivered the baby himself when it became clear they could not reach town in time, his hands shaking as he caught the tiny, squalling infant and placed him in Temperance's arms. They named him Thomas, after Thaddeus's father, And he was perfect in every way. Watching Temperance with their son, Thaddeus marveled at how much had changed in less than 2 years. The woman who had stood on that platform with a sign declaring her unfit for marriage had become the heart of his home, the strength of his ranch, and the love of his life. "What are you thinking?" Temperance asked, catching him staring. "That I am the luckiest man alive. Even with midnight feedings and a colicky baby, even then." He leaned over to kiss her forehead, then the baby's. Especially then. The ranch continued to prosper. By Thomas's second birthday, they had paid off the last of the debts Thaddeus's father had left and were operating in the black for the first time in years. They added a room onto the house, then another when Temperance became pregnant with their second child. Their daughter was born in the autumn of 1882, a red-faced, furious infant who came into the world howling and did not stop for what felt like months. They named her Tessa, and she had her mother's storm-gray eyes and stubborn determination. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew. The ranch flourished. Thaddeus and Temperance worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word. The love between them deepened and matured, tested by hardship and strengthened by shared success. Marcus Reeves eventually sold the Triple Cross and moved back east, his plans to dominate the territories ranching never quite materializing. The new owners were pleasant enough, content to be good neighbors rather than adversaries. Castle Dome remained a rough frontier town, but it was changing too, becoming more established as the railroad pushed west and civilization followed. Temperance became friends with other ranch wives, though she never quite lost the wariness that came from her time on the auction platform. Some scars took longer to heal than others. On their 10th anniversary, Thaddeus and Temperance rode out to the spring that had caused so much trouble with Reeves. They sat together in the shade of a cottonwood tree, watching the water bubble up clear and cold from the desert floor. "Do you ever think about that day in town?" Thaddeus asked. "When I bought you?" "Sometimes," Temperance admitted. "Less than I used to. That woman on the platform feels like someone else now, someone from a different life." "Do you regret how we came together?" She considered the question seriously. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret living in a world where women can be sold like cattle, where desperation forces people into impossible situations. But do I regret that it brought me to you? No, never." "I love you," he said, the words as true as the first time he had spoken them. "Everything good in my life traces back to the moment I saw you and decided I could not leave you standing there." "You saved me that day," Temperance said softly. "But I saved you too, I think. We saved each other." They sat in companionable silence, hands linked, watching the sun paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. In the distance, they could hear Thomas and Tessa playing near the house under the watchful eye of one of the ranch hands. The cattle were fat and healthy. The ranch was secure. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility. Thomas grew into a thoughtful boy who loved the animals and spent hours helping his mother in the garden. Tessa was pure wildfire, always climbing things she should not and asking questions that had no easy answers. When she was 5, Temperance started teaching her to read using the same books she had learned from, and the girl took to education like she took to everything else, with passionate intensity. In the summer of 1887, Temperance gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Timothy and Theodore. The house suddenly felt very small with 4 children. So Thaddeus and the ranch hands spent 6 months building an addition, expanding the house until it sprawled comfortably across the hillside. "We are going to need a bigger table," Temperance observed, standing in the chaos of children and construction. "We are going to need a lot of things," Thaddeus agreed, catching Theodore before the toddler could tumble down the porch steps. "But we will manage, we always do." They more than managed. The ranch became one of the most successful in the territory, known for quality cattle and fair dealing. Thaddeus served on the local Cattlemen's Association, working to bring better practices and regulations to the industry. Temperance became involved in efforts to establish a proper school in Castle Dome, determined that all children, regardless of background, would have access to education. When Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, they celebrated with a party that brought together ranchers from across the region. Thomas was 32 by then, married with 3 children of his own, preparing to take over the ranch. Tessa had become a teacher in Phoenix, fighting for women's suffrage and educational reform. The twins were 25, both working the ranch and courting nice girls from neighboring properties. Thaddeus and Temperance stood on their porch as the sun set on the celebration, watching their grandchildren chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "We built something good here," Thaddeus said, his arm around Temperance's waist. His hair was more gray than brown now, his face deeply lined by sun and time, but his eyes still held the same warmth they had when he first asked her name. "We did," Temperance agreed. She was 56, her auburn hair threaded with silver, her hands still strong despite years of hard work. "From something that started so wrong, we made something right. I would do it all again," he said. "Every difficult moment, every challenge, it was worth it to end up here with you. Even the twins' terrible twos, both of them at once," he laughed. "Even that, maybe not happily, but yes." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they stood together as they had stood together for 34 years, watching their legacy run and play and grow in the desert twilight. Years continued to pass in the gentle way of established lives. Thaddeus and Temperance gradually handed more responsibilities to Thomas, stepping back to enjoy their grandchildren and the fruits of their long labor. The ranch remained prosperous, a testament to the foundation they had built together. In 1918, Thaddeus fell ill. The doctor came from town and spoke in quiet, serious tones about heart trouble and the limitations of medical science. Temperance sat by his bedside, holding his hand as she had held it through decades of shared life. "I am not ready to let you go," she said fiercely. "I know," he replied, his voice weak but steady. "But I have had a good life, Temperance, better than I ever imagined possible. That day in Castle Dome when I saw you on that platform, I thought I was just doing the right thing. I had no idea I was finding my future." "You gave me everything," she said, tears finally escaping despite her efforts to hold them back. "A home, a family, dignity, love, everything. We gave each other everything," he corrected gently. "I was nothing before you, just a man failing at maintaining his father's legacy. You did not just become the strength of this ranch. You became the strength of my entire life." He rallied for a few more days, long enough to say goodbye to each of his children and grandchildren, long enough to see one final sunset paint the desert in glorious color. Then, with Temperance's hand in his and their family surrounding them, Thaddeus Armstrong closed his eyes and slipped peacefully away. Temperance grieved deeply, but not destructively. She had spent too many years building and creating to fall apart now. She stayed on the ranch, helping Thomas manage things, teaching her grandchildren the lessons she had learned, and advocating for causes she believed in. She lived to see women gain the right to vote, lived to see automobiles replace horses on most roads, lived to see the world transform in ways that would have seemed impossible on that dusty platform in 1878. She passed away in 1931 at the age of 75, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. They buried her next to Thaddeus on the hillside overlooking the spring, beneath the cottonwood tree where they used to sit together on quiet evenings. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations, each inheriting not just the land but the story of how it was saved. They told the tale of the rancher who bought a woman labeled unfit for marriage, and how she became the strength of his ranch and the love of his life. They told it honestly, not shying away from the ugliness of how it began, but celebrating the beauty of what it became, because in the end, that was the truth Thaddeus and Temperance had proven through their lives together. That even from the darkest circumstances, from the most unjust beginnings, love and determination could build something lasting. That partnership and respect could transform a desperate arrangement into a profound bond. That two people, working together with courage and commitment, could create a legacy that would outlive them both. The Armstrong Ranch still operates today, a thriving operation on land that has been in the same family for over a century and a half. Visitors sometimes ask about the two headstones beneath the old cottonwood tree, weathered by time but still readable. The current owners tell them the story, keeping alive the memory of their ancestors who proved that the strength of a place comes not from the land itself, but from the love and labor of the people who tend it. And on quiet evenings, when the sun sets over the Arizona desert painting everything gold and crimson, it is not hard to imagine two figures sitting together beneath that cottonwood tree, hands linked, watching the future they built unfold before them in all its beautiful, hard-won glory.